Our number one competitor was Zip2, and it was Elon Musk's first company with his brother. So we were sort of battling it out with them. We were going to merge at one point. What happened is...
Today I'm sitting down with Barry O'Reilly to talk about his one-of-a-kind career journey. Barry's story starts in San Francisco during the dot-com boom, where he worked at a company that nearly merged with Elon Musk's first startup, Zip2. From there, Barry went global, launching a mobile game startup in Scotland, leading education initiatives in Australia, and collaborating with the World Health Organization in the Philippines. And he also worked on business transformation with massive brands like British Airways, Barclays, and The Economist. Barry is the best-selling author of Lean Enterprise and Unlearn, two must-read for anyone looking to ditch outdated ideas and build organizations that actually thrive. In today's episode, we'll get to know about the importance of unlearning, early career lessons, career transitions, and how to deal with setback and career stagnation. So if you're ready to rethink your career, embrace change, and unlearn the habits holding you back, this episode is for you. What are these things that you have to unlearn versus what are the things that you have to keep? That's the million-dollar question, right?
I have a series of questions that I ask people. So the first one is...
when do you know that it is time for a career change?
Maybe boredom, and maybe feeling that like 80% of the problem's been solved. I've got to maybe 85% of competency in it.
A lot of people are afraid to start over. Any advice to somebody who is stuck in their job?
It's about creating optionality. The way I always found options is that...
Hi, Barry. Great to have you on my podcast. How are you today?
Fantastic. And yeah, always fun to sort of join people and share stories. And I'm excited to share them with you. So thanks for having me.
Great. Let's dive in. Just looking forward for this discussion. A lot of interesting questions I want to ask you. But let's start with your backstory. What are these influences that made you who you are today and formed the view about work and about life that you have today?
Yeah, I was quite lucky. My first ever work experience was when I was still in university. I had the chance, I grew up in Ireland and studied in Ireland, and I had the chance to go to San Francisco and work in an early stage tech startup in 1999. And at the time I was training to be an engineer and I could write HTML. So, I was a highly proficient engineer at the time. But it was an amazing experience, really understanding what it was like to build a company from the ground up. Our business was called citysearch.com. So what we would do is we would go around to local businesses and we would sort of take photos of their local business, and it could be like anescafe.citysearch.com, and we put them on the internet, and it was a really fascinating time. Our number one competitor was Zip2, and it was Elon Musk's first company with his brother. Oh. So we were sort of battling it out with them. We were going to merge at one point, but obviously Elon went on and sold his company to start PayPal, and we ended up selling the company to Ticketmaster. But it was a fantastic sort of experience for me to like really see what it was like to build and iterate and create things very, very quickly. And it really sort of inspired me, if you will, to like follow much more of an entrepreneurial path, to sort of think about how I could build more things and the power of technology and just being in great small teams, actually how much effect you could have. And that really sort of sparked, if you will, a lot of my interest in what I've supposedly got on to do for really the rest of my career.
Wow, that's amazing. Starting and in competition with Elon Musk himself. Wow, that's amazing, Barry.
Yeah, there was the two of them. Yeah, it was quite funny, But this was the very earliest beginnings of the internet. And nobody really knew what it was and how it would work. But it was a fascinating time where just these ideas of search engines were starting to appear. Small to medium-sized businesses were, spending money to be on this thing called the internet. And, there's always a great sort of interview, I think, with Jeff Bezos around the same time. Yeah. He talks about when he was going around raising money for Amazon in 99. And he said 99 out of the first 100 questions investors would ask him It was, what is the internet? And so it was really like just a unique time. And yeah, I just happened to be, tried to put myself in this place because I realized at the time San Francisco was really the hub of these sort of tech environment. And, as someone who was living in, Ireland was a relatively small country at that stage. This was sort of, for me, a chance to sort of get into an arena where, the best players were playing. And that was sort of the main reason that we went there. And, I had a fantastic experience, and it really sort of got me, a taste of what I wanted to do going forward.
Great. What a great start in a working life. So what happened after that? What was your next job or your first job? This was experience while you were studying, right?
So it's funny. I had after having such a great experience as part of my university course, I also had to do work experience. So I took a sort of 6 months position as like an intern role in a company in Ireland. And I actually had probably the worst experience, if you will, of my corporate career, if you will, at that stage. I had been working in a team, and when you're the intern, they often sort of give you very menial tasks to do, or just stuff that is low risk, but helps the team move forward. And we were testing this banking platform, and the test manager gave me an assignment to do to test a certain component of the system. And I ran my tests. Everything verified, looked out. I handed in my report to them. And then, I finished for the day and went home. And then the next day I came in, and there was a huge sort of huddle, happening in the team. And there was a sort of frustration and anger. And, the team had done a release of the software that afternoon after I'd left. And it had failures in it. But what happened is, the test manager blamed me for all these failures that were totally unrelated to the work that I had done. And they were sort of just new in their job. And I had to be removed from the project and reprimanded. And, as someone who at that stage was very, very young in their sort of work experience, I was sort of scapegoated, and I really didn't understand why this had happened to me. I'm probably too young to process a lot of this stuff. And, but it was horrific. I have to then go return back to this sort of company. And for the next couple of weeks, they just sat me in the office in the corner and they wouldn't let me do anything. I just came into their office and was sort of ostracized. And I didn't really know why. No one explained to me why I was taken off the project and why I had to sort of sit in this sort of room, but in an open office. But I would just go in every day and have no work to do. Until I sort of finished the term. And it was really only then that one of the team members came over and explained to me what the sort of assumption was. And I was sort of in shock. This thing had just sort of gone, I'd gone over my head. I didn't understand how I was sort of made an example of, because I didn't understand the issue that I had created, which I don't believe I did. And yet this person who worked in that company just used me as a sort of fall guy for an issue that, they were responsible for. So it was one of these very different experiences of, when I first went into the workplace, working in this highly collaborative, highly innovative, small teams working together, to this next experience where it was highly bureaucratic, politicized, and I was used, if you will, as a pawn by someone who was, way, way more senior than me and much more, I guess, politically astute than me, but in essence created me as a scapegoat for work that they didn't do well. So it was a very interesting sort of beginning for me. And if anything, it sort of made me start to think, where do I want to spend my time? Do I want to be in these sort of, big corporate environments where they're highly politicized and people are playing games to sort of get ahead? Or do I want to work in small, dedicated teams that are, where you feel like a sense of safety and a sense of camaraderie? And surprise, surprise, once I finished university, I went and started a startup again, and sort of maybe, you know, a very early affirmation for me about the type of environments that I was going to succeed in and where I didn't want to be.
No, it's amazing because you had the best experience and then you had the worst experience. And having the worst experience, in a sense, it was horrific, as you explained. But then how many people get the chance to see this, the best and the worst, so early in their career, right? And you knew what you're going to do. Because there's so many people who don't know what they want to do, and they start something and they try many things, etc., and they still can't find what is that thing that they like. And you did it very early. How old were you then?
I would have been 19 at that time.
Wow.
Still very young. And again, like not mature enough even to process what was happening around me. You know, I didn't have political sort of nous or understand how those environments could be created, right?
Yeah.
My earliest experiences had just been very positive. And like, you know, when I worked in San Francisco, no one asked me what age I was. Nobody asked me, you know, what degree I had. They were just like, can you get this problem solved? And I could, you know, like I was able to engineer. And, you know, at the time it was very simple HTML code, but I could program and launch websites. And it was much more a value of contribution rather than a determination of age, seniority, experience, which was very much sort of the second experience that I had, you know. And yeah, it was definitely just something, you know, in retrospect, I think definitely had an effect on me about how I thought and how I continue to try and think about when I'm working with people, is what are they bringing to the team? Like their behavior and their actions is really what I tend to focus on when evaluating our people's contribution, rather than, you know, how long they've been somewhere, you know, their age, their seniority. It's sort of interesting how it has shaped me in that respect.
Yeah, great. And these questions about age and seniority, and they still exist till today. I mean, there's some decisions made based on that. And when you think about it, it's 20, 30 years since that first experience, and things don't change.
I agree, you know, and I think but it might even be worse now. You know, I see that we have this amazing new technologies that are starting to come into the workplace, you know, and you have a lot of the people that are most au fait with those technologies are not people that have been in the workplace for 30 years. Yeah. It's often younger generations who, you know, understand how to use AI. They understand how to use technology to make them more efficient, faster, more scalable, more productive, you know. And then you have managers who've been in companies for 30 years and they don't know how to open a PowerPoint slide deck, you know. So it's fascinating, and you can see why the frustration can sometime emerge in these workplaces where, you know, people believe that through seniority, they have, you know, the role of leader rather than the behaviors and the skills that a lot of these people can use from, you know, their natural digital native mindset and behavior. Yeah,
no, absolutely agree with you. So you did a lot of career changes, right? You did a lot of changes.
Yeah, you know, I always have believed that growth lies outside your comfort zone. You know, and I'm someone who's always followed my intellectual curiosity, and I like doing hard things. Like I'm a huge believer in, you know, interesting people and doing hard things. That's generally my barometer for where I go. I started off as an engineer, as I said, and had the chance to work in a couple of startups in the early stage of my career. But I also realized, even as an engineer, I'd probably go to work and, you know, maybe one day out of 5, I would have like, you know, a really great flow state, you know, where I'd just go in, I'd start writing code and it'd be 5 o'clock and I'd be like, wow, where did the day go? That would only happen to me like 1 out of sort of 5 days. The other 4 days I'd be banging my head against the wall, frustrated, couldn't figure things out. But because I was in a smaller startup at the time, I also got to get more exposure to different roles and contribution opportunities in a business, or building products more specifically. And what I actually found that I enjoyed more was spending time with customers, understanding their problems, their needs, and shaping that as requirements to give to engineers to build. That was sort of the beginning of product management, sort of in the early 2000s. And on the back of that, I sort of stopped writing code and moved much more into this idea of product management and product development. And that was sort of like one of those first changes for me to stop writing code, but to actually start identifying the problems and unmet needs and then defining them for engineers to work on. And because I had been an engineer as well, it also helped a little bit with the dialogue between translating business ideas to technology solutions. And, and that was sort of the big, one of the first, as you say, transitions where I sort of maybe stepped away from what I had invested 5-6 years in learning to actually follow really my curiosity and interest and move into a different sort of role. And yeah, that was a fantastic experience for me.
So when do you know that it is time for a career change?
I have this sort of feeling of like local maximum and also, maybe boredom and maybe feeling that like 80% of the problem's been solved, and when I sort of get to any of these like tipping points, like, I feel like, notionally, whether correct or right in my head, that I've either hit as much, I've hit the tipping point about how much can I learn from this experience. I've got to maybe 85% of competency in it. And, I can keep getting better, of course. But if I don't have the same interest in it, I feel like I've sort of taken my interest and my skill level to a sufficient sort of level. Then I'm always looking at like what's an adjacency to what I'm doing that's kind of interesting and is driving more curiosity, right? And that's literally how I went from an engineer to a product manager. I was writing code, but I was okay at it. But actually what I found is that I was way more interested in problem design, and I could read about it, learn about it, want to do it like on my own time. And I felt like I could grow a lot more in that area. And so that it triggered me to go, I'm going to shift, and similarly, as I worked in many companies and in these sort of early stage companies, I've also learned as well, like being in the product team was interesting. But then I also started to enjoy the idea of building businesses. So rather than just focus on building products, which I've done for many years, I really got interested in building businesses that build products. And, that was another chance for me to sort of get outside my comfort zone and take more of a leadership role in building a company as opposed to just building a product and sets of features within a company. That's generally how I've sort of gauged myself, is if I feel like, one of the fun examples when I was doing consulting, my wife used to joke about with me when I would get asked questions, she would know my answer to those questions before, because I was just repeating the same stuff again and again and again. And that was sort of another signal where I was like, I've got to get out of this, I'm asleep at the wheel. And so again, that's what got me back to like building and starting companies again.
That's great. It seems that for you found the right formula, adding a little bit and moving to adjacent, kind of using a lot of your previous experience to move to something one level up, let's say, right? But a lot of people are afraid to start over. They just think, how I'm going to forget everything I've done so far and start over from scratch. How did you deal with these feelings? Because I'm sure you had them, right?
Yeah, no, it's managing risk is how I think about it. 7 years ago, I had built my own firm as a sort of doing consulting for Fortune 500 execs or startups. And, it was a very lucrative business. And, but to my point before, my wife would joke at me like I was sort of asleep at the wheel. I was just like going through the same motions every day, giving the same 10 problems a company could have. And these have these 7 problems out of the 10, or this company has 4 out of the 10. And, to me, like I was losing engagement, and in some respects, probably creating blind spots because I was pattern matching too quickly, but rather than really diving in deep. But then I sort of, part of me was sort of missing this idea of building things again. And it was one of these things where I was sort of like, well, I'm not just going to throw away everything that I've worked on for the last, 8 or 10 years and just start from scratch. But I do want to spend more time building things. So literally the way I thought about it is I've 100% of my time. How could I dedicate 10 or 15% of my time exploring this new path that I want to go down? Could I, work in a team? Maybe I wouldn't charge what I would charge for my consulting rates. I would just get exposure to that.
Mm-hmm.
And in startups, that might mean working for equity or, a smaller fee or whatever it might be. It didn't matter. I was investing in myself to learn more about this opportunity, and that sort of allowed me to manage the risk. Instead of going 100% all in, it has to work. I went from 0% of my time on it to 15% of my time on it, and I could experiment and learn and find out what I liked and didn't like. And then really, as I had more conviction, I could start to move that needle, right?
Mm-hmm.
From 15 to 30% to 50 to 80% to, so to me, it's sort of like a risk-based approach to exploring, because it may be unlikely what I think I want to do is not what I want to do. And if I see success and I'm enjoying it, then I can increase, my investment in that area, if you will, and turn down the dial of what I'm currently doing. And that's actually how I tend to think about it more, rather than this sort of big bang, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing and, go become a painter or, an architect or something like this. That's not necessarily, I think, good way I would personally tackle it.
No, absolutely. I actually did the big bang leave because I was working at a bank and I didn't have time I thought I don't have time to develop anything on the side. And now 3 years later, I could see that, I learned that I should have done it your way.
Oh, no, that's not true.
Absolutely.
I think
because I spent a year doing exactly what you just explained, right? I developed my interests and started growing and growing and growing. That's how I did it. So what would be, apart from this, do you have any other advice to somebody who is stuck in their job, but they just don't know how to deal with that and what is the next step they should take?
Yeah, well, again, for me, it's about creating optionality, right? You sort of have to make bets, right? You have to make these like small investments in experiences that will help you learn, right? So if I'm in a job, and look, I know I've been there myself and many people have, right? And if you're in a job, you've got responsibilities, you might have a mortgage, you might have a family, there's a million reasons why, people are stuck or they can feel stuck, and that's a very difficult situation to be in. But, the way I always found options is that I would look for these ways for me to experiment with something that drives my curiosity. So a friend of mine, actually, we were having lunch the other day. He's the COO of, a global bank here. And, he's someone who, you may even be describing as in a similar position to this, and, he was like to me, I've started to learn how to code Python. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. He goes, yeah, I'm doing this course. It's a 20-hour course. It's over, 3 weeks. And I'm learning how to write code. And I'm like, that's amazing, and to me, that's an expression of somebody trying to experiment and learn. Wow, would I enjoy this? Would this be something different from what I'm doing that I could enjoy? And for me, it's a small bet. It's a small risk. The cost is time and maybe a little bit of money to do a course or whatever it might be. But you learn through the action of doing these things, and it gives you a little bit of space to explore and find passion in an interest, more importantly, in areas that are outside what you're currently doing, And for me, it's always this method of experimenting and finding something that works and then doubling down, compounding on that experience that gives you more conviction. It's something that you want to do, that you could enjoy, and then it's thinking about how you transition to that, right? How you build up those skills. So, you should always think big about what you're trying to do, but you can start small and learn like fast what works and what doesn't for you. And that's typically how I've, tried to approach, whether it's a career change, whether it's a new skill I wanted to learn, even how I spend my time. I'm sort of pretty systematic about it in a way, which is kind of funny.
No, the way I'm listening to you, I can imagine that you apply a systematic approach to everything you do. Because when you explain it, it makes absolutely perfect sense and logical sense. You were talking about risks. What was this high risk or the biggest risk you took that changed your perception of what success looks like?
I've definitely taken a lot of risks, and I really believe people should do that. But probably the biggest risk I took was I was working in London for, a very well-known consultancy called ThoughtWorks. I had a fantastic role. It was a global role. I was traveling all over the world. It was an amazing experience, and probably, one of the best learning curves I've ever had in my career being in that company. But I was sort of like missing, building again, like sort of creating stuff for myself, or starting something from scratch. And I still remember sitting down with the CEO of the company at the time and explaining to them, I was going to quit and move to America from London and start this company. And like, they were great, they were like, did everything they could to try and convince me not to leave the company. But, they were a good person. So, eventually realized, okay, I'm not talking you out of doing this. You really want to do it. So, he was like, good on you, go for it. And yeah, like I quit my job. We set up a company in the US with a couple of other peers at the time. And like, I literally quit my job on Monday, and on Friday I was back in San Francisco starting up this company again, and, it was very exciting because I was like, right, here we are. There's me and a few other people. We're going to start this business, and we had a huge opportunity with this very prestigious sort of Fortune 50, company. And then literally the contract that we were meant to do got cancelled, like almost within 2 or 3 days of me arriving. And within sort of 2 or 3 weeks, it became really, really obvious that the people I was starting the company with, that it wasn't going to work. It was one of these moments where, I felt sort of shame and foolishness at the same time. I was like, oh my, how did I do this? How did I quit my very, good, comfortable, well-designed lifestyle and just end up here where, the company's not going to work. The contract fell through. I don't know anybody in this town. Like, how am I going to, oh my God, what have I done? I had this sort of massive feeling of, all these things start pouring through your mind that you've been foolish, or you overstepped or overreached for something. And it really sucked, it was,
I know.
And quite lonely, I was like in this, like, sort of, I think I was like staying in Airbnbs, like in San Francisco, at no real home or anything like this. And, it was one of these moments where, and I remember, again, speaking to a friend and also to my wife, and they were like, look, this is an opportunity. You are somewhere new. You are somewhere where, you don't know anybody necessarily, obviously, but, you do have an opportunity to try and make something of being there, of giving this a shot, and it was kind of funny. I sat down and was like, okay, well, why don't I set some goals for myself over the next 3 months? And if I hit these goals, that's going to give me confidence that I can actually build a firm, starting on my own and go from there. And it was kind of crazy, like I went from this sort of moment of fear and anxiety to like focused and writing down, saying, right, I'm going to get two clients in the next 3 months. I'm going to, do 4 talks in the next 3 months. I'm going to do all of this stuff. And then I just went into a sort of action mode after that, if you will, where I was like, every day I would sort of wake up, I would go for a run, I would drink a coffee, and then I would come back and like just focus on trying to get to where these metrics I had set myself, and, it wasn't easy. The first few weeks were horrific. Like anyone who didn't reply to my email, I was like, oh, this is never going to happen. But you crawl your way out of these things, and funnily enough, I hit the goals in 3 months, and then I was like, okay, well, let's set a goal for another 3 months. And I actually just got into this habit of doing it. And again, I grew this practice that, was phenomenally successful and, really helped give me exposure to a whole new market and a new group of people that I never could have imagined. It literally started from ground zero, quite a lot of despair, but that was sort of part of the process for me, and if anything, it has taught me about resiliency and the ability to bounce back. And, that probably has stood to me in, much more in my career, is like being able to work through those harder situations.
Absolute great example of how action is the only cure for dealing with stagnation or an issue or a problem. Because it would have been so easy for you to despair and, go into a long period of depression and probably even going back and asking for your previous job if you were not enough ashamed, But you chose to do actions, and not a lot of people do that. And that's why you're more successful, because most of the people would actually, the first way out would be, I'll go back and ask for my job and probably I'll have it.
Yeah, no, it went through my mind. Don't think it didn't, and it was interesting, but like you say, huge amount of growth. And that is, your point is so true. Like, the only way forward is to take action. Look, sitting there feeling sorry for yourself, lamenting the fact, that is part of the process. You sort of have to grieve a little bit. Like you can't just sort of flip into action mode. And you'll still grieve, even as you take action. But the thing that, as you have said, action is the only way forward. Because if you don't do something, you can't create new information, you can't create new opportunity. And, I've certainly learned that. And even now, I founded a venture studio called Nobody Studios. And, I'm constantly working with entrepreneurs who are like in dire situations. They're building a product, nobody's using it. They're pitching investors and no investor like understands their product. Like, it's very tough scenarios all the time. And yet all you can do is encourage them to like send one more email, write one more post, like do one more pitch.
Yeah.
Because that is the only thing that will get you there. And it's definitely been a great lesson.
Let's talk about your book, Unlearn. And what was that turning point that led you to realize that you need to unlearn certain things in order to learn new things?
So prior to writing Unlearn, I'd written another book called Lean Enterprise, which was part of the lean startup movement, which was really like it was like a groundswell in product development in sort of 2010. Eric Ries wrote The Lean Startup, and he invited me and my co-authors to write Lean Enterprise, which was targeted at scaling and enterprise businesses. I got the chance then to meet like executives in Fortune 500s all over the world, or early stage startups that were really interested in this concept of experimentation and learning in building products. And what I met, every time I met these leaders, like they were the most brightest, smartest people, smarter than me, that I'd ever met, and it's like so competent. So learning new skills was never a problem for them, right? I could talk to them about how to interview customers, how to design prototypes, how to set up their teams to be more effective. Like, they just got it, it was, these people were they were bright. But the biggest problem was not learning new things. It was actually letting go of their existing behaviors, most of which had made them successful to the point that they were in, right? It's a bit like this local maximum idea. They had sort of become so good at what they did, they used the same tool for every situation because those tools had made them so successful, right? And these are like executives in Fortune 500 companies, right? Making millions of dollars every year. Like, they were outstanding people. But when they faced uncertainty, they would always go to the tools they knew that were not getting them the results, right? Because the world was changing, technology was changing, customer demand was changing. So what I was trying to help people understand is that the skill was not just learning new things, it was also unlearning, what you had used before. And even the way I describe unlearning, it's not discarding or forgetting your knowledge or experience. It's the conscious act of letting go of outdated information and making space for new information to come in to inform your decision making and action. So really, it's this idea that you need to exchange in your mind things that you have used before and may no longer work, and make space for new information or ideas to come in. And, once I sort of explained it like that to people, they suddenly were like, oh, wow, this is a system that I can use. And really, I just have to diagnose areas where I may need to unlearn. And they were all great experimenters. So that's really what inspired Unlearn. And, the book is sort of almost 6 years old now, I think, literally in a couple of months, and at the end of the year, actually. And it continues, for people to read it and be inspired by it. And, it was certainly a great experience for me, and a bit of an aha moment, if you will, that sort of struck me from working with these phenomenal people.
But how do you know what are these things that you have to unlearn versus what are the things that you have to keep? That's the $1 million question, right?
It is, yeah. No, it is. And, and it's sort of, this is what makes it so much fun doing, talking to people about this, because for everybody it's different, right? Like I said, the way I describe unlearning, it's more a process of letting go or reframing or moving away from once useful mindsets and behaviors that were successful in the past, but now probably limiting, if you will, your results. So I have a series of questions that I ask people, and, I'll ask you, and your listeners can, if they're here, they can get a piece of paper, but you can sort of diagnose areas where you need to unlearn. And I ask people these sets of questions. So the first one is, can you think of a situation where you're not achieving the outcomes that you're aiming for? Maybe you're not living up to the expectations you have for yourself. Or maybe there's a situation that you're sort of struggling with, or you're maybe even avoiding altogether because you're like, I just can't deal with that now. Or maybe somewhere where you've tried everything that you can think of and you're still not getting a breakthrough, right? So not living up to the expectations you have for yourself, not getting the outcomes you want, maybe a situation you're struggling with or avoiding altogether. Or maybe you've tried everything you can think of and you're still not getting the desired results. And when I ask people that question, it's not just one thing that pops into their head. It's often like 5 or 6 things. I don't know what's going through your mind, maybe if you want to share or not, but something, often arrives in people's head, right? And for me, what presents is often an obstacle, right? So people are like, oh, I need to get fitter or healthier. I need to have a healthier lifestyle, or I need to have better relationships with my friends and my family, or I need to be better at giving and taking feedback when I work with my team, or I need to not be so look for perfection in everything, or, all these things just start flooding through people's minds when you ask them that question, and then for me, that's really the obstacle that's presenting itself, right? Like nobody wants to be perfect at everything. Nobody wants to sort of, struggle to get feedback, and nobody wants to have poor relationships with their family or whatever it might, so these are just the obstacles. And often you're just helping people reframe them as the outcome that they're looking for, and then once you can sort of reframe an obstacle as an outcome, then it gives people the opportunity to sort of be more expansive about new behaviors that they could try to get towards the outcome that they want. And, that for me is sort of how the system then that I would start to teach people about how they could experiment with new behaviors. But the trick of it all, though, unfortunately, is the answer is not doing what you've always done. And that's what most people go to. It's actually doing things that you're uncomfortable with, that are unknown, and you're probably not going to be very good at at your first attempt.
Yeah.
And that's outside people's comfort zone. So again, that's where the growth is.
Yeah. So this is really a self-reflection, right? A self-reflection of what am I, what are my goals, why I didn't achieve things. And there's so many of us don't even pause to do this, to ask yourself the question, because it's not a complex, it's not like something we've never heard about, right? Just that you have to find the time to stop and think about these things and answer these questions honestly and openly, and then have the guts to actually do something about it. It's not that difficult, right? It's not.
No, you're right on, and, like even as you say all those things, I become aware of how, like, I struggle to make time, like this idea of, like, when do I really, like, get away from my desk and take a walk and just think about things, just process stuff. Mm-hmm. And which gives me the space then to be more retrospective or have like reflection on what's happening, I've tried to journal many times as well. It's one of these things that when I get in the habit of journaling, I'm always so glad I do it. And then I fall out of the habit of it again. And then I get angry at myself, But it's again, because we're so programmed to be on this treadmill, of the next email, the next call, the next meeting, the next thing I have to do with my family, the next thing I've got to do on the weekend, the next weekend after that. Like these things, you really have to work hard to be consistent and have discipline about making space for yourself, to actually think about things. And as you say, like once you give yourself that space, it's not, complex. These questions even I was asking folks, and everyone has the answers. It's just, the physical and the mental space to do it is, that's the struggle.
Absolutely. Well, let's end the podcast on a bit of more personal note. So you spoke about your career, about your life, but what is one thing we still don't know about you?
Well, one thing, there's many things. Unfortunately, we can't go through them all. But like for me, I'm also someone who I took great inspiration from the environment that I grew up in. Like it's funny, my parents were very, very different people. My mother is extremely, like, really, really creative in her own way. She was a dress designer. She would, was massive into arts. And really propagated a lot of this. And similarly, my dad was very systematic person. It was kind of funny, but they really exposed me to a huge array of everything from enjoying playing music and teaching and learning instruments right through to a great exposure to the arts and also science and many different things. And, it's one of these and also exercise and sport. So I was kind of lucky to have this like very holistic sort of approach to life that was inspired by, my parents and family from a very, very early age. And it certainly has helped me, yourself from having high stressed, high stakes roles that you really need a well-balanced system around you of, and for me, it's eating well, it's sleeping well, it's exercise, it's creative pursuits outside of what I do day to day. Music is a huge part to help me relax and unwind and think about something different. So, it's only later that I've sort of been able to, again, reflect back and know how that has helped me, where at the time I was just exposed to it. But it's something I'm very grateful for. And yeah, so if you're looking for, whether it's someone to play turntables and DJ or guitars, your next company, don't hire me. But if you're stuck, I know I might be able to fill a spot until you find someone better.
And what was the best day in your life and the worst day in your life?
Like there's, all the classic things of like my family are a huge part of my life, so my kids being born and all these great things are huge things for me. I tend to have this weird view that I haven't had the best day in my life yet. I feel like there's so many more exciting things ahead. I have pretty audacious goals that I'm aiming for that I haven't achieved. So maybe I'll never achieve them, or maybe I'll keep recalibrating to be bigger and more audacious. So that's really what drives me on in terms of like a best day. I also I'm quite an optimist, so I don't live in a world of this was the worst thing that ever happened to me, right? The story I shared at the start of the show was one of these very hard lessons that I've had to learn, right? I had to learn what it's like to work in a corporate environment. And, I don't know, I should have had to learn it, but I had to, right? It's part of my story. Just like when I quit my job and moved to America to try and start a company and it didn't work. These were, very fundamental lessons that haven't stopped me from continuing to take risk, but it sort of has helped me take maybe more calculated risks. And so I tend to think of things more in those sorts of viewpoints, that they're rather than the extremes. I think the best is ahead and the worst is just another step on the way to getting towards the best. So yeah, that's more my mindset.
Wow, that's a great way to finish the podcast and a great way to look at life, actually.
Well, thanks for asking the question. Yeah, and it's been great to share with you and your listeners. And I'm happy if people are curious to learn more, I reach out and get in touch. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. So how do they reach you? What is the best way if people want to ask
so
questions?
If they're interested in any blogs, books, and so forth that I write, you can just go to barryoreilly.com. And then if you're interested in building early stage companies, I'm a co-founder of Nobody Studios. We're a venture studio with the goal to do 100 companies over the next 5 years. So just go check out nobodystudios.com, or we're Nobody Studios on all good social media platforms too as well. So you can follow us there.
Great. Thank you so much, Barry. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Annie. Thanks for having me on the show.
Please hit subscribe to the show and leave a review or comment about how you find this episode.